It has been nearly 21 years since the release of Resident Evil 3 Nemesis on the PlayStation 1, and after the release of the hugely successful Resident Evil 2 Remake, it seemed logical that we would be getting a Resident Evil 3 Remake as well. For many years, fans have thought about what Resident Evil 2 and 3 would look like in the modern day. What would Raccoon City look like using modern graphics? In 2019, those thoughts and dreams were realised, and I think they completely blew away all our expectations. Resident Evil 2 Remake went on to sell over 5.8 million copies, more than the original Resident Evil 2, but is Resident Evil 3 Remake as good? Yo, what's going on guys? My name is Doodles. Hopefully you guys are going to enjoy the video today. If you do, be sure to drop a like on it. Also subscribe with those notifications on, because I plan on doing a lot of Resident Evil 3 content, including mod videos and many more. So make sure you're sticking around for them. But for now, let's take one last trip down to Raccoon City. Now, as always, I will start off by talking about the graphics. Once again, they are superb. The game looks basically like Resident Evil 2 Remake, which is understandable considering they were developed at the same time, and RE3 reuses many elements from RE2. Now, the RE engine is one of the best video games engine there is, in my opinion. Everything looks so realistic with such attention to the tiniest details. The lighting and reflections are amazing too. Now, the only downside is that for some reason the RE engine can never quite nail hair. It always looks a bit fuzzy around the outline. And also, when the enemies are far away, quite often they will downgrade to 30 FPS while the rest of the environment and enemies are moving at 60 plus FPS, and it can really look out of place in the scene. Now, one thing to mention, I do feel there's some slight graphical downgrading parts compared to RE2. Sometimes the texture looks a little noticeably more blurry or pixelated than it would have in RE2, which I don't know why that is the case. Now, the criticism about 30 FPS enemies and fuzzy hair would also apply to RE2. It could just be a limitation of the RE engine, but it's a minor criticism at best, and overall the game looks fantastic and one of the best looking games to date. Now, right, moving on to the gameplay. Now, it is more of the same what we got with RE2, and that's not a bad thing. Resident Evil 2 plays like an absolute dream, and obviously that means that Resident Evil 3 does as well. Now, Resident Evil 2 and 3 were developed largely side by side, so it does make sense that the gameplay would be very similar. But like the original version, Resident Evil 3 focuses more on action rather than survival horror. Zombies are plentiful. It even has a section where you have to kill a massive wave of zombies and survive until the end. So pretty much like a horde mode type of scenario. Now, Resident Evil 3 also doesn't start with a slow build like most Resident Evil titles. Instead, within a couple of minutes of playing, Nemesis crashes the party and chases you through a building. Right from the start, the game sets a pace of fast action and constant fear as to when Nemesis might show up next. Oh yeah, and by the way, enemies are still complete bullet sponges in this game. Now, in the original Resident Evil 3, we got to play as Carlos as well as Jill, and this is also the case in the new RE3 Remake, and in my opinion, Carlos' sections are the best in the game. In Carlos' sections, we get to go back to the RPD, and it fills in a lot of the blanks that Resident Evil 2 left. Now, we'll go into more detail about that during the story section, which I'll get to in a little bit later on. Now, we also take control of Carlos in the hospital, and both sections are as close to survival horror as the game gets, putting us into narrow hallways filled with enemies. It was a great change of pace to go from Jill's more action orientated sections to the old school survival horror sections that Resident Evil is known for. Now, overall the gameplay did fit with what most of us expected based on what the original Resident Evil 3 was. RE3 was a more action focused game rather than a slow build and survival horror game. Now, Joel's main goal is to escape Raccoon City where all the chaos is going on as civilians try and flee the horde of zombies and other BOWs that are taking over the city. Enemies are plentiful, the action is high, and Nemesis is hot on your trail. Now, this was the same in the original as it is in the remake, so if you come into this expecting a slow build and survival game like 2019's RE2, you may be disappointed. But if you played or at least aware of the original, you'll go into this experience knowing what to expect, and it doesn't disappoint in that aspect. Now, as with RE2, not all the content from the original games has made it into the remake. Some of the content isn't missed, but some of it is very noticeably missed, and it is not given the attention it perhaps could have received. Now, although it made no real difference in terms of the outcome, the original RE3 had branched paths when facing Nemesis. Will Jill stay and fight, or will she retreat to safety? Your choice would affect your progression in the minutes after the encounter. This is missing in the remake and is instead a singular linear path. Now, this is a little bit disappointing, but overall it's not a big deal. Now, when it comes to cut content, the most obvious ones are cut locations, enemies and weapons. Iconic locations such as the clock tower are notably missing from RE3, although you do fight Nemesis in the clock tower's plaza. The graveyard, park and factory have all been removed from the game, as well as the end location for the final Nemesis fight, which has been replaced by a nest lab just like in RE2. Now, many enemies are also notably missing from the game, some of them only making appearances in the original Resident Evil 3 as well. Enemies such as Gravediggers, the Worm and the Spiders are nowhere to be seen. Thankfully we still get to fight the Hunters, both beta and gamma variants. Elika also does make an appearance in the RPD, which is cool because they don't appear in the original RE3. Now, when it comes to weapons, there are some instances of them being cut, but it never felt lacking in that regard. The mine thrower has been replaced by mine ammo for the grenade launcher, for example. The most notable cut in terms of weapons is the enhanced ammo, which is a stronger version of regular ammo, which makes fights, especially against Nemesis, much easier. And also, where's Barry Burton gone? Now, moving on to the story, if you've already played the original Resident Evil 3, you will already know the premise of the game. Raccoon City has fallen after the T-Virus escaped the Arklay Mountains, starting a zombie outbreak. You play as STARS member Jill Valentine, who escaped the Arklay Mansion during the events of Resident Evil 1, whose sole mission is to get the fuck out of Dodge and escape the city. Now, as mentioned earlier, the game throws the player right in the deep end with a Nemesis encounter just minutes into the game, which was great and really set the pace of being a high action experience rather than a slow build and survival horror game. Shortly after, you meet Brad as in the original, but I found this to be a very disappointing experience. In the original, Brad, who is nicknamed Chicken Heart, was terrified of Nemesis and seemingly any encounter with the undead. Now, in the original RE3, Brad's time is fairly short, just like it is in this game. Nemesis catches up to him and takes him out in one of the most iconic moments in Resident Evil history. In this remake, however, though, he is less terrified of the situation, which is great for character development, and I like that about Brad. However, his death was a huge disappointment. Brad is bitten trying to stop a horde of zombies entering a bar that he and Jill ran to safety. I also think this is the same bar that's in Resident Evil Outbreak series, although I'm not entirely sure. He then tells Jill to run and sacrifice himself to the zombies, which we don't see his death, by the way. While this is a heroic act that I can appreciate, it felt very lackluster in the fact that we didn't see Brad's death or have him killed off saving Jill against Nemesis. Instead, it was just a zombie bite. Now, quick note, Brad can also be seen outside the RPD in the original RE2 if you follow certain steps. In a cutscene, we see Marvin confront the zombified Brad. Now, when he realises who it is, he says sorry before he goes to pull the trigger and down his friend. Hearing this, zombie Brad also says sorry. Now, I'm guessing Brad was repeating the word he just heard, showing his brain has not yet fully turned and there was still some shred of humanity inside. Marvin stops in his tracks, allowing Brad to pounce and bite him before Marvin retreats into the RPD. This helps to explain how Marvin became wounded, as we saw in RE2. In the Outbreak series, Marvin was bitten by a regular zombie in one of the scenarios, but I think this is a much better scene than just having him bitten by a regular zombie. The game also helps to throw in blanks in the RPD and shows us how the police station came to be in the state it was in as we entered it in RE2. It explains why there's a corpse in a locker, why the steam pipe has burst, and why there's a giant hole in the wall in the shower room. It was really great to see this. Now, there's also some evidence of the game being rushed, which I'll get into a bit later on, such as the third floor of the RPD just above the shower room. There's also a hole in the wall which leads towards the library. Now, we expected it to be Nemesis that caused the hole, but in RE3 there's actually no hole there, meaning it happens at some point after the RPD section finishes and RE2 begins, but it's never explained. Now, imagine something was meant to take place to cause this hole, but we never get to see what it is. But even with that in mind, this section is perhaps my favourite section in the entire game, and I'm really glad they added it in. Getting to see what happened to Marvin and sort of just seeing what happened to the RPD and what caused it to be how it is in RE2 was such great fun to see. I am so glad that we got to see it. There's more stuff in the section as well, but I'll let you guys discover that yourself. There's still more stuff to talk about, but I can't spoil everything for you guys if you haven't played the game. Now, I also want to give a quick shout out to the character development in this game, which is vastly better than the original RE3. With these remakes, Capcom has nailed the ability to make the player feel invested in the characters. As I was playing, despite the fact that I knew how the game would end, I was rooting for Jill and hoping she would succeed. Now I was the same with Leon and Claire in RE2, more so Claire though. I felt that I built a real connection with these characters, and that isn't something that I see often when it comes to video games. They really nailed every member of the UBCS too. Carlos is a much better character this time around, and I really enjoyed seeing Carlos and Jill get more trusting of each other and building that bond. Nikolai's character is also a huge improvement over the original version. Now pretty much he's just a massive dickhead, and the game makes you want to see him get his comeuppance, and it is so satisfied when the game is over. Now once again, I won't spoil it, but it's great. The rest of the UBCS has also had better development this time, even very minor characters such as Tyrell. But I can't praise them entirely when it comes to character development because I feel they dropped the ball in some instances. Dario Rosso makes a return. He's the character who locks himself in a lorry and refuses to come out. In the original we can eventually find out his fate, but we don't in this game. There also isn't much interaction between Joe and Dario. After a few words he locks himself away in pretty much like a passing moment that doesn't really hold any weight. Now you can have more interactions with him by interacting with the door, and he will argue with you, including telling you to handcuff yourself to a zombie. That's nice of him. Also, if you shoot the truck he'll freak out, eventually revealing his brother-in-law is a lawyer and he will sue you. But considering we know how Dario came to be in the situation he is in due to the Chinese RE3 manhwa, it would have been great to see a bit more of him. Now one character as well I feel they truly dropped the ball with is Kendo. In a recent RE2 update they added a file from Joe in Kendo's gun shop. This hinted that we will be seeing more of Kendo in RE3. Well, we did, but no more than we do in RE2. There's one short cutscene with some dialogue between Joe and Kendo, and then you move on as if nothing happened. There was plenty of opportunity for Kendo to reveal what happened to his wife, Emma, and himself, or even help Joe in some way and perhaps become a short-term side character, or even have his own section. I was disappointed to see how little he's featured in this game, especially because they teased it months ago. Now as mentioned in the cut content section, the end location of the original RE3 is replaced by a more generic lab. It's not like we've seen one of them in Resident Evil before. Now this is one of my least favourite aspects of the game, as it wasn't even as good as the lab in RE2. After such strong points such as the hospital section, this felt lackluster, although the ending helicopter scene with Nikolai was fantastic and I really enjoyed it. I won't spoil it too much, even though this review and probably the gameplay footage you've seen in the background is absolutely full of spoilers. Now right, it's time to talk about the enemy the whole game is based around, and that is Nemesis. From the opening minutes of the game, his presence is known. In fact, in the opening cutscene they show him being operated on. It's not made known who it is that becomes Nemesis. In the manhwa it was a boxer, and in the movies it was a guy called Matt, but I don't think either of those is canon, so who knows. Now Nemesis is a truly daunting enemy, basically Mr. X on steroids, or at least on paper. While the character is terrifying, they absolutely drop the ball with the execution of him. Rather than him being a constant threat terrorising you like Mr. X would around the RPD, his appearances are all scripted sections, bar a couple of them where you're actually in the environment with him and can fight or run. But running is not the best idea because Nemesis can outrun you. The dodge mechanic really comes in handy here, although apart from a few brief sections where you're free to fight him or run, every other section is scripted, such as the point where he's shooting rockets at you and you need to dodge them, or being stalked through a burning building with the section concluding once you reach the end with no real choice to fight him. In that instance, he's just present in the scene as you're running through the building. He actually doesn't pose any real threat to you. Now they could have done so much more with Nemesis rather than just having scripted events or appearances for a boss fight. Generally, except the sequence where Nemesis is firing rockets at you and you're trying to escape him, his sections and boss battles are actually some of the worst aspects of the game in my opinion. Now Resident Evil 3 is lacking in terms of features and replayability compared to RE2, but the game also does improve on some aspects as well. With the game only having one linear scenario, replayability is important. While RE2 and even RE1 has multiple scenarios, RE3 doesn't have that. It's just playing the same game over and over. The game has assisted standard and hardcore difficulties like RE2, but beating the game on hardcore unlocks Nightmare and then Inferno, which does give the player a reason to come back. Now instead of unlocking weapons based on performance, you now unlock weapons by collecting BP, or I'm assuming battle points, which is granted for completing the records. The shop is a great way to make use of the records section that was in RE2 and gives you a purpose to actually go and collect them. They're like achievements pretty much. I do like how they've expanded features like these, but apart from wanting to unlock the infinite rocket launcher and speedrun, there isn't really too much of a reason to want to play the same linear experience over and over again. Now of course we couldn't end this review without talking about Project Resistance. Now part of the Resident Evil 3 package is the brand new multiplayer experience called Resistance. This is Capcom's take on the 4v1 style of games made popular by games such as Dead by Daylight. 4 players take control of survivors who find themselves trying to escape from a certain scenario. Now stopping the survivors is a mastermind who can spawn and even control various enemies, BOWs, traps, etc. Now I'm not gonna lie, it's a fairly fun game, and games such as Dead by Daylight remain popular to this day. The problem is that being online only, it's hard to tell whether this will remain popular in the long term. Now Resistance was teased before RE3 with alpha back in 2019, which wasn't received very well. The perception was that this was going to be a $60 standalone experience, and I believe this was actually meant to be the case, and also led to the rushed at times feel that RE3 has. My belief is they were actually going to give us Resident Evil Resistance as a standalone game, but after the alpha flop they decided to rush RE3 and get it done and bundle this game with it instead. Now without Resistance we may have perhaps gotten a better game in RE3, but I guess we'll never know. Now for some of my final thoughts. Now Resident Evil 3 Remake is a high action and fun reimagining of Jill's final stand and her escape from Raccoon City. It's not perfect by any means and does feel rushed in parts, but it's still a fun experience that ties together and explains certain aspects of RE2. I feel they could have made Nemesis a better enemy and perhaps expanded on a few aspects and not been lazy with yet another lab ending. But overall, it was a very entertaining few hours playing this. I still think Resident Evil 2 is the better game, just like the original RE2 and 3, but this is definitely worth playing. Now as a lifelong Resident Evil fan, I'm happy to see my dreams of what classic RE would look like in the modern day, and it largely lived up to expectations. Now moving on to the final review scores. The good points of the game I would say are Jill's character development. I really enjoyed her as a character this time around. Carlos's sections are some of the best in the game. Now Nikolai is a much better villain in this game compared to the original. There's actually a proper soundtrack which pays tribute to a lot of the classic music. As you guys know, RE2 Remake didn't really have that much of a soundtrack and it was pretty bad for it. Exploring Raccoon City in more detail than we got in RE2 was so much fun. I really liked how Marvin gets bit, I really liked how they explained it. The graphics look fantastic and the RPD section is probably the best aspect of the game. Now the bad points, Nemesis appearances are generally the weaker aspects of the gameplay. Nemesis is cheap as fuck too. The lack of replayability, Brad's death is pretty lackluster. They really dropped the ball of Kendall. I really don't like the sewer hunters or the steam zombies, and there's no Barry, which was a big shame as well. Now for the graphics, I would give these a 9 out of 10. Like I said, there's a few minor details which I think are slight downgrades over RE2, which I would give like a 9.5. So I think a 9 is pretty fitting for this. For the gameplay, I would give it an 8.5. For the features of the game, I would give it a 7. For the story, a 9. And the multiplayer, a 7. Which gives us an average score of 8.1 out of 10. Which I think is a pretty good score for this. If I wasn't doing this review and you asked me how good Resident Evil 3 was, I'd probably say it was an 8 out of 10 game. So the fact that it actually came out at 8.1 is pretty on point. So there we go, ladies and gentlemen, that is my review and my thoughts of the Resident Evil 3 Remake. Overall, I really enjoyed the experience. I'm having so much fun playing it. I cannot wait to jump into it again. It's not as good as RE2 by any means in my opinion, but it's still a very fun experience nonetheless. Project Resistance, it would be great to see how that one plays out over the coming months, whether people still play it or whether it will just sort of disappear in a few weeks, only time will tell. But hopefully you guys enjoyed this one today. If you did, be sure to drop a like on the video, subscribe with those notifications on, because it lets me know you guys really enjoy the Resident Evil content and it will encourage me to make more. If you want to see any of my Resident Evil 2 stuff as well, make sure I put a playlist down below in the description or something like that. My name is Doodles, I thank you so much for watching and I'll see you guys next time.